Yesterday I got a little bit of rain. It was like a quarter inch, but I mean it was like a man. It was a lot of lightning. It was a lot of lightning and a lot of thunder, and then it rained about a quarter inch. So I'm not exactly sure what was going on with that, but it was a massive amount of lightning. And when I was driving here from work, when I was driving home from work, it was pouring. And so I got about a quarter inch of rain yesterday. I was, I was I was like, if it rained an inch or something, that would have been fantastic, because of the water. The water in the pond has actually turned into poo-poo water. The water in the pond is no good. The animals, one of the animals actually was getting had a poo-poo water disease. He was having diarrhea, and I'm pretty certain, I'm almost certain that it was because the animal was sitting in the water and drinking the water. And so it's the animal with the wonky ear. It's the animal, it's that animal. He sits in the water all the time because he has a real hard time dealing with the heat. And that animal had poo-poo water disease. I could tell, if the animal ever has a diarrhea, if the animal ever has diarrhea that smells very badly, that's a very and they got poo-poo water, that's a very clear indicator that the water quality is low. All right, that's how I tell if the manure smells bad. Usually the cattle manure, it doesn't smell bad. Cattle manure doesn't smell bad. And in all honesty, the dung beetles and stuff, once a cow patty dries out, it just turns into dirt. I mean, cow poop smells like dirt. It doesn't. Cow poop doesn't really smell like anything. But if the animals have death diarrhea, if the animals have poo-poo water disease, it will make their poop smell bad. And so that's a very clear indicator. If the animal starts having diarrhea and the manure smells bad, that's a very clear indicator that the animal is having water quality problems. And if the pond, and I walked out there to the pond and I took a look at the pond, and the pond is muddy. The pond is not good. The pond water is not good. Okay. And so if I had gotten some fresh pond water, that would have been fantastic. But it didn't rain enough to give me it didn't rain enough to clean out my pond water. But it's fine. It is what it is. Yesterday may have been the last little bit of rain that I get for maybe the next month and a half. I mean, it might be. I might not see rain again until September. Late August. I may not. And so, that's probably the last little bit of rain that I'm gonna get. But yesterday I did put in an offer. I put in my first offer for a new piece of land. The piece of land that's right around the corner. I took a look at that. I did put in an offer for that piece of land. It's just under $1 million. And I figured, well, the whole thing about this property, the property that I put in the offer for, this property, it's not a fantastic property. It is not a fantastic property. There are several problems with the property, but the location is good for me. The location is good, and so I figured, I'm gonna put in an offer. And so I put in my first offer. I did put in my first offer, and it was just under $1 million. And so, I mean, it's a very small deal. It is a small deal. It's not some and the thing about it is that it's not some incredible piece of real estate. Okay, it's not. I took a look at it, and I went out there and I took a look at it, and the real estate is not some incredible piece of real estate, but I can make money on it. I am positive I can make money on it. Right, I can actually probably make a good bit of money on it, and and it's not too expensive. All right, but the thing about the price is that the way where the price is right now, my whole thing about paying full price, right? And I talk about this, the idea of paying full price is that if I'm going to pay full price for anything, then I can buy anything, right? I mean, that's the whole thing about paying full price. And I either look for a good deal, or I look for something that is expensive but it's like pristine. Like if I have something that is expensive but it is actually supposed to be expensive, then that's good too. All right, like if I go in and I find some some 200 acre field, right? If I find some 200 acre field and they're selling it for $10,000 an acre, if they're selling it for $12,000 an acre, right? And the thing is actually pristine. Like, it's actually a good piece of real estate. The real estate is really nice, and the real estate looks really good, and you know, it's a good piece of real estate. So you know, my whole thing about deals, right? If I was gonna pay full price for anything, if I was legitimately gonna pay full price for everything, and you have to understand that effectively like 98% of all the deals, like real estate deals, it doesn't even matter if it's a real estate deal, it could be any deal. 98%, either 98% of these deals I will not touch with a 50-foot pole, or they're just gonna be average. 98% of them, I guarantee it. Very rarely is there ever a piece of real estate where it's like, wow, this is a phenomenal piece of real estate. Very rarely. All right, effectively 98% of these deals, and it's probably not just real estate. You know, it's everything. All right, it's businesses, real estate, it doesn't matter. Stocks, it doesn't matter. All right, like me, when I go and doing a real estate deal is going to take some time. It is going to take some time, but that's my whole thing about paying full price, is that if I was going to pay full price, if I was going to pay the market average, and if I was going to pay full price, I could buy anything. Right? Effectively, you know, 98% of the market opens up, because you have to understand, and I go and I look at deals all the time. All right, I look at them all the time. It doesn't matter if I'm talking about buying cattle, buying land, you know, it doesn't matter. I look at these deals all the time. All right, and effectively 98% of all the deals on the planet are either I wouldn't touch it with a 50-foot pole, or they're going to be average. I guarantee it. All right, very rarely do I ever find a deal. I actually found one piece of real estate when I was going around looking at my different deals. I found one piece of real estate where I'm like, wow, this is a good piece of real estate. I really like this thing. This is a phenomenal piece of real estate, but it's also expensive, right? It's also expensive. It's 300 and 50 acres, and it's $12,000 an acre, right? So I mean, I've only found one piece of real estate where I'm like, this is a phenomenal piece of real estate. I really like this thing. This is the land is on the top of a hill. There's a slight incline all the way up towards the property, all the way, the property's on top of a hill, right? And it's and it's right by the highway. Right, I mean, but now we're talking about a 370 acre field, a 350 acre field that's on the market for $12,000 an acre, right? So I've only seen one. All right, out of all the deals that I've gone and looked at, and I've looked at dozens of them, right, I've only seen one where I'm like, this is actually a good piece of real estate, and everything else is either it's average, it's just kind of okay, or I wouldn't touch it with a 50-foot pole. All right. So that's doing a real estate deal is going to take some time, but I did put in my first offer yesterday. And the reason that I put in, the whole thing about my financial situation. If I were going to tell you, what about my financial situation, and we were going to talk about it okay. So the reason that I'm looking for a real estate deal right now is that effectively, and I've been talking about this, my balance sheet right now, when you're looking at what I'm doing, when you take a look at what I'm doing, and I have thoroughly described this, right? I would anticipate that I don't really have any problems at all for the next 3, 4, 5 months. I honestly probably will have very minimal, if not zero issues. All right, knock on wood, I will not have any issues at all over the next 3, 4, 5 months. I probably won't. I'll probably end up in a situation where I just sit here and I collect money, right? And that is not an ideal situation. I talked about this, you don't want to be in a situation where you legitimately think that collecting money is it's whatever, right? I mean, the whole idea of, this is not an ideal situation, right? I will probably collect money for the next 3, 4, 5 months. And when I talk about collecting money, here's the thing. The thing about collecting money is that in the next 3 months, I will probably almost guarantee it. I will deleverage all of my cattle. I will have zero debt on my cattle. I will still have 30 animals. I will have, I will be generating enough money. I will be generating about 7 to 8 times more money than I spend. Something like that. So I will have zero debt on my cattle. I will still have 30 animals, and I will be generating about 7 to 8 times more money than I spend. But here's the thing. If I generate, the thing about generating money like that is that if I went and I legitimately just leveraged against my balance sheet, if that was all that I did, if I just went and I leveraged against my balance sheet, I could double my income instantaneously, right? I could double my income instantaneously, right? It's not an ideal situation. And I talk about this, the whole thing about leveraging against my assets. And in all honesty, like when you take a look at what I got right now, I would be willing to leverage against this. I would be willing to do it. All right, I don't see why not. And when I leverage against it, how would I do it, right? I have some money in the bank account from selling my animals a couple weeks ago. I have determined that my animals are stable. And in all honesty, these animals have gone up significantly in value. I would say that the average weight of my herd right now is probably close to 500 pounds. And I brought in these animals at 225. All right, my animals are stable. They have gone significantly up in value. And I have money in my bank account. In this situation, what would I do, right? I would invest the money that I have in my bank account. I would invest that money. I would stabilize that asset, and then I would leverage against it. And in all honesty, because, I've already been sitting around for about 2 weeks. I've already been sitting around for about a week, not, not growing my business or anything, right? I mean, I would actually be willing to leverage against the money in my bank account even right now. I would be willing to do that. All right, because, I have taken a look at my assets, right? I have taken a look at my balance sheet. I have determined that my herd is stable. The average weight of my herd right now is probably about 500 pounds. And I brought in the animals at an average weight of 225. So if I brought them in at 225 and I have them at 500, they have gone up in value. I have objectively determined that my balance sheet has gone up in value significantly. There is a large amount of positive equity. And I would anticipate that my herd appreciates for at least 3, 4, 5 months. All right, and I would be willing to leverage. I'm not saying go and leverage yourself, right? I've always said this. I'm not saying go and leverage. I'm just saying I would be willing to do it. Under these circumstances, I would be willing to do it. And in all honesty, if I leveraged, right, I would keep the 2 herds completely separated, right? But I don't have enough space on this, because here's the thing. If I were to just take the money that I made and I were to invest that, and then I were to take a even amount of a loan against the money that I made, I would have to purchase about 28 to 30 animals today. Where am I going to put 28 to 30 animals? And in all honesty, I would have to sell another 10 animals next month. Where would I put another 28 to 30 animals, right? Where will, but that's the whole thing, all right? That's the situation that I'm in right now. And I talk about this, the big idea of being up to the eyeballs in money is not good. All right, a lot of people think that, and I've talked about one of the, it's like if I ever, the whole thing about, one of the clear indicators of being poor. You only see cash as money. If you only see cash as money, you're poor. I can almost guarantee it. Cash is not even that good of an asset. It is an important asset. You should have some cash. You should have some money. But it is not that good of an asset. It's not. All right. I would rather have $10,000 worth of the S&P 500 than $10,000 worth of cash. All right. I would rather have $10,000 worth of the S&P 500. All right. And, because at the end of the day, if you legitimately need $500 or whatever, you can just liquidate $500 worth of your stock. All right, I talk about this all the time. If you have an asset and you purchase that asset at its equitable evaluation, at its appraisal evaluation, you are just trading the money for the asset. You're not buying anything. At the end of the day, the whole reason that I described this whole thing is because, if I legitimately wanted my money back, if I legitimately just felt like, I'm just going to go and just maximize my cash position and I'm just going to sit around with cash because that's what I have determined is a good idea, right? If I legitimately, felt like that, then I could just liquidate my assets, right? Boom, congratulations. Now what? Nothing, right? The cash is not going to do anything. Money is not that good of, cash is not that good of an asset. It's not, all right? But, that's a very realistic way to look at it. Within 3 months, I would reasonably anticipate that I have 30 animals. I have zero leverage against my herd, and I make about 7 to 8 times more money than I spend. That's what I would be willing to bet. That's something like, it's going to be something like that. Maybe 5 to 7 times more money than I spend. But if I have zero leverage on my herd and I am making 5 to 7 times more money than I spend, I could legitimately double my income instantaneously just by leveraging against my assets. All right, and if when I leverage against my assets, I do it in a very safe way, right? I've always said, don't leverage yourself to the eyeballs. If you legitimately think that you need money to make money, you only think like that because you're poor. I guarantee it. If you are poor, you will see the world as a poor person. Everything you see, you will see it as a poor person. I guarantee it. And you're effectively probably going to die poor. There is probably no recovery. You will hold on to being poor for the rest of your life. For whatever reason, it makes you feel better about yourself, right? Becoming successful was too hard, so you quit, right? It makes you feel better about yourself. It doesn't matter what your reason is, but you will hold on to being poor for the rest of your life. If you legitimately think that you need money, go to the bank and take a loan. You don't need money. I put a lot of emphasis on this idea. Nothing here costs me anything. None of this costs me anything. All of this makes me money. And at the end of the day, even if I had nothing, I could redo it all in 30 seconds. It doesn't matter. All right, and when I take a look at what I got going on, but that's what I see happening over the next 3 months. Over the next 3 months, I will have about 30 animals. I will have zero leverage against my herd. I will be making somewhere between 5, 7, 8 times more money than I spend. And it's not an ideal situation because if I legitimately just leveraged against my assets, I could instantaneously double my income. All right, and when I leverage, I also get tax benefits. All right, this is not an ideal situation, but even right now, for me to grow my business, and I take a look at my balance sheet, right, I would say that all of my assets, all of my cattle are stable, okay? All of my cattle are stable. I would bet that I don't want to give myself bad juju, but this is what I would consider to be a stabilized herd. My herd is stable. I brought them in at an average weight of 225 pounds, and as of today, when I take a look at them, the whole set of them, they're probably about 500 pounds on the average. All right, so they have definitely gone up in value, and they've probably gone up in value a lot. All right, at this point, I would be willing to leverage. But if I leveraged, and I've always said that, when I have a stabilized herd, the way that I leverage is to take the earnings of my business, because you have to understand that I do liquidate, right? I don't hold on to these cattle forever, right? If I held on to them for too long, they would become too heavy, and then I would, effectively, I wouldn't be making any money, right? So I do liquidate my animals, and when I have a stabilized herd, how do I leverage, right? When I have a stabilized herd, when I take a look at my balance sheet, and I would say that my herd is stable, how do I leverage against a stabilized herd? Right? I take the money that I make, I invest that money, and then I leverage against it. There is another way for me to leverage that I don't do. But I don't do it right now. But in the other way to leverage against to leverage against my assets, another way to do it. And there is a time and a place to do this. It's very difficult for me to keep track of, and and it's easier for me to keep track of how much because when I'm sitting at the sale barn and my cattle get sold and I see how much money I make, and I say, okay, I made XYZ amount of money. Right, I'll just invest XYZ amount of money times 2. It's very easy, right? I don't have to sit there like before the sale barn, a week before the sale barn, and get an average weight of my herd and take a look at market reports, and get an idea for what my animals are worth. There is another way to leverage against the balance sheet. All right, and I've spoken about this. A very realistic way to do this you know, is to take the, well, you take the appraisal value of your animals, right? You take the appraisal value of your animals and then you leverage against that. But the way that I leverage, you know, one of these, it's simpler to do it this way. It is easier to keep track of, and therefore I do it this way instead. When I go to the sale barn and I sell some animals that day and they cut me a check for XYZ amount of money, I invest XYZ amount of money times 2. I just double it. Because if I invest 2 times, and I am investing my money and I'm taking an equal amount of leverage against the money that I have made, right? And that effectively keeps me at a 70% leverage on my balance sheet. And when I do that, I would keep the 2 herds separated, right? I keep the 2 herds separated. I keep them in the preconditioning pen, and then I put them out in the front yard, and then I leave the rest of the animals on the backyard, right? But I'm already at maximum capacity. And just to put things in perspective, if I were going to do that right now, I would have to purchase about 28 animals today. All right, I would have to go to the sale barn and purchase 28 animals today. But the other way to do it, the other way to take leverage from what I have seen, or from what I do, but I don't really do this very often, and if I do it, I will say I am doing it. But the other way to do it is to take the average weight of your herd, right? And you can take the average weight of your herd by putting them on a total mixed ration for 3 to 5 days. Just feed them until they stop eating. Use a total mixed ration type diet. You know, you're honestly looking for something that is about 12 to 14% protein, all right? And make sure you use a total mixed ration, all right? Do not feed them a 20% crate pellet or whatever, you know. Feed them a total mixed ration. And feed them until they stop eating, all right? And just understand that your animals will eat about 3% of their body weight a day in dry matter. About 3 to 3.3%. That's what my animals eat. All right, so, you know, it's like if you take the amount of feed, or, you know, just take the amount of feed that you're giving them. Because if you're feeding them, you know, a total mixed ration grain, and, you know, the moisture content is going to be very low, like probably 5% or lower. So you don't really have to account for that. Just use 3%, all right? Just, you know, take the number of animals that you have, take the amount of feed that you're giving them, and then just estimate, you know, what would your animals weigh if the number of animals that you have was eating 3% of their body weight. Take the total amount of feed that you're giving them and divide it by, you know, and divide it. Would it be by 33? You know, take the total amount of feed and you know, divide it by 30. But you know, I don't know the formula right off the top of my head. I have to do this stuff on a piece of paper. But that's how you do it, all right? You estimate that your animal will eat about 3% of their body weight. And so when you feed them, you measure how much you give them, you weigh out how much you give them, and then you just feed it to them until they stop eating, right? You make sure that they eat as much as they can until they stop eating. And usually that first day or 2, they are going to gorge themselves on the feed. Especially if you haven't had them on feed, they will gorge themselves on it. So you don't really want to take your data on the first 2 days. All right, you really want to take your data on day 3, 4, or 5. And that's about what your animal is going to weigh. And when you have the estimate weight of your animal, and you take a look at the commodity markets, or you take a look at your local market reports, you can determine what your animals are valued at. Go to the sale barn and take a look at what animals at that weight sell for. All right, you know, and then congratulations, there is your appraisal value. And then you can leverage against that if you felt like it. That's another safe way to do it. But the only time, you have to understand, the only time that I ever leverage is when I have a stabilized asset. That's the only time. All right, you know, don't skip over this part. All right, you know, don't skip over this part. Don't go picking and choosing. You know, you have to understand, the only time that I ever leverage, ever, is when I have a stabilized asset to leverage against. That's it. Right now, I would be willing to leverage. All right, I would be willing to do it. Am I going to do it? No, I'm not. Because if I did, I would have to buy 28 animals today. All right, and so I did do my first real estate deal. I did put in my first offer, but this piece of real estate, it's average. It's not a horrible piece of property. It's not a great piece of property. It's average. And to be completely fair, I've only seen one property, you know, that I'm like, wow, this is a phenomenal property. In terms of the deals that I've looked at recently, all right, and if it's, I've only seen one that I'm like, wow, I really like this property. The rest of them have either been, I wouldn't touch this deal with a 50-foot pole, or they're average. I guarantee that's about 98% of the deals on the market all the time, all right? And it takes a long time to find the right deal. It does. It takes a long time. All right, everything is not a good deal. I talk about this a lot. Everything is not a good deal. Everything is not a good deal, but that's that. I did put in my first offer yesterday, and it was for just about $1 million. All right, it was just under $1 million. And the whole thing about this is like, if the deal, for what, it's not, I'm effectively, looking at paying, effectively full price. And the whole thing about paying full price is that if I was going to pay full price for anything, I can buy anything. All right, that's the whole thing about paying full price. I don't pay full price. All right, I don't pay full price because if I was going to pay full price, I could buy anything. And and if I could buy anything, I would buy anything. Then I would go and find the best one. All right, and at the end of the day, unless it's like a pristine asset, if it is a legitimate pristine asset, I take a look at it and I'm like, wow, this is an incredible asset, then sure, I would pay full price. I would be willing to pay full price, but I'm not going to pay full price for average, and I'm not even going to touch a bad deal with a 50-foot pole, right? Why would I touch a bad deal, right? I talk about this. Why would I touch a bad deal? Nobody cares about your deal. All right, you're going to die poor, have fun. All right, you're probably a gremlin. All right, you're borderline a bum. I guarantee, I wouldn't touch a bad deal with a 50-foot pole. Why would I? All right, but I did put in my first offer yesterday. But that's what I see happening with my financials over the next 3 months. I will have zero leverage on my cattle. I will be making about 5, 7, 8 times more money than I spend on a monthly basis. And I will have zero leverage on my cattle, and I will still have 30 cattle. But that is not an ideal situation to be in, because if that is what my balance sheet looks like, if I am making 5 times more money than I spend, and I have zero leverage on my cattle, and I have 30 cattle, then I could instantaneously double my income by just leveraging against my assets. Why would I sit around and even right now, I've been doing this for about a week, just sitting here collecting money, and I feel like I'm physically sick. This is not exactly an ideal situation. This is not a good situation to be in. I legitimately feel physically sick. Like, I feel like throwing up. Like, it's not, sitting here collecting money is a waste of time. The money's not even going to do anything. All right, being up to the eyeballs in money is not the goal. All right, it doesn't do anything. The money after a certain point does not do anything. All right, and I'm effectively just sitting here collecting money, but I did put in my first offer yesterday. I did put in my first offer yesterday, okay? I did do that, but and this morning I was actually taking a look at it, and I was like, man, I really want to go to the sale barn and buy 12 animals. I really want to go to the sale barn and buy 10 animals, but then I'm like, where am I going to put these animals? And sitting there, and it legitimately made me feel sick. I legitimately, this is not a ideal situation. All right, this is not an ideal situation. I legitimately am sitting on money. I am up to the eyeballs in money, and I'm still making more money. And I anticipate that I will continue to make a drastic amount of money for like the next 3, 4, or 5 months. I would actually anticipate that within the next 3 months, I am able to deleverage my entire balance sheet, still have 30 animals, and I will make about 5 times more money than I'm spending. I would reasonably anticipate. That's what I see happening with my balance sheet. And that is not an ideal situation, because if I am making 5 times more money than I am spending, that money is not going to do anything. There is no way to spend that amount of money. Once you see it, there is no way for me to spend that amount of money. If I legitimately went to the grocery store and I bought steak and shrimp every day for the rest of my life, I still could not spend that amount of money. If I sat in my living room and had my air conditioner on at 65 degrees for the rest of my life, I still could not spend that amount of money. If I went to the dealership right now and bought myself an F-350, it still would not even dent the money. Right, there is no way to and I've talked about this. The whole thing about it is like once you understand it, it is what the money. Money after a certain point does not do anything. Once you hit about $15,000 a month, the money just becomes negligible. All right, but up to about $15,000 a month, and I'm gonna be flat out honest about this, and I will be flat out honest about this too. And I'll just tell you about what I saw. Up until about $15,000 a month, more money will probably improve your life, and it will make you happier. It probably will. For the average person, it will. Up until you're making about $15,000 a month, more money will actually make you happier. It probably will. It definitely did for me. Because when I hit $15,000 a month, and I realized, oh man, even after I pay for everything, I still have $8,000 a month left over. I still have $9,000 a month left over. I still have $10,000 a month left over. That was an incredibly good feeling. And what did I do with the money? I grew my business with it, right? I grew my business, right? That's what I did with the money. I didn't go on a magical journey. I didn't buy myself a Lamborghini. I legitimately grew my business with it. All right, I actually ended up growing my business by over 1,000% by doing that. And as of today, my income is actually so high. The amount of money that I make is actually so high that, it's borderline. The price of everything is just practically negligible. It's actually kind of comical. All right, like when I go to the grocery store and, it's like, the price of everything is borderline comical. Everything is so cheap that it doesn't matter. And I'm just going to be flat out honest about it. And I will just tell you about what I saw. Up until about $15,000 a month, until you're making about $15,000 a month, more money will probably make you happier, simply because you will have more opportunities in life. All right, you don't have to worry about your bills anymore. All right, you have a retirement account. Right? I mean, you don't worry about the cost of anything. That's effectively what happens at $15,000 a month. But the thing about me, and it's like, how did I get there, right? And I've always talked about, the way that I made it was, by utilizing assets, right? I've talked about this. You have to understand an asset. You have to find an asset that you understand. All right, chances are you're not going to go and get you might be able to, create a margin for yourself by getting yourself a better job. But working that better job, if you work a better job, if you make more money and then you just go out and spend the money, your life will not get better in the long term. It won't. You might feel like your life is doing a little bit better because you have a little bit bigger of a house and you have a little bit better of a car. But at the end of the day, your life is not improving. All right. You really need to, from what I have seen, you really need to find a way to make money with your assets, make a positive return on your capital. All right. That's what I have seen. And when and just to show you things from how I did it, I legitimately managed to grow my business by over 1,000% in the last 2.5 years by doing this. And as of today, I legitimately generate enough money towards, the price of everything is borderline comical. Everything is effectively just whatever to me in terms of the price, and my income is still going up. I am still making astronomically more money. I can almost guarantee it. And I've always said that if something happens along the way that causes it to change, this set me back 2 months, this set me back 2 weeks, whatever it may be, I will legitimately just say it. All right, but as of it is what I'm not a malicious person. I'm not giving you the wrong information. It just is what I actually managed to do it. I legitimately grew my business by over 1,000% in 2.5 years, and I would anticipate that I increase my income by more than 200% by the end of the year. And just to be completely straightforward, honest about it, until you're making about $15,000 a month, from what I have seen, until you're making about $15,000 a month, more money will probably make you happier, granted that you're not an idiot. All right, because what happens at $15,000 a month is effectively you can pay for all of your bills. You can pay for all of your bills. It doesn't matter. You have a retirement account, right? And, in all honesty, your assets are still growing, right? I've always said that the whole thing about, investing in something is to have your capital grow, right? Your capital is producing you a return. Your investment account is probably growing on its own, right? But that's effectively what happens up until about $15,000 a month, all right? The thing that I did with my money, anytime that I made money, I grew my business with it. All right, I grew my business with it, and that's how I got here. All right, I started off with 5 animals, and in all honesty, like, if I was legitimately just going to continue running my business right now and I was just going to continue forward, I would honestly have to buy about 28 animals today. I would be willing to leverage against these animals. I would be willing to leverage against it, and I'm already sitting on money. I would be willing to leverage against my animals. As of today, I would be willing to do it. And if I leveraged against my balance sheet, how would I do it? I would take the money that I make when I sell my animals, invest that money, and then just leverage against that, because that would effectively keep my balance sheet at an equal proportion of leverage, right? But if I did that today, I would have to go to the sell barn and buy 28 animals right now. All right, and where am I going to put 28 more animals? All right, but that's the situation that I'm in. I'm already up to the eyeballs in money. I am still making more money. I would anticipate that my assets produce me a return for the next 3, 4, or 5 months. All right, I am already up to the eyeballs in money, and I'm still making more money. I would actually anticipate that in 3 months, my herd is completely deleveraged. I make about 5 to 7 times more money than I spend. And I have 30 animals with 0 debt. And if I have 30 animals with 0 debt, right, and they have an unrealized gain value on them, it would be in my best interest to just leverage against my 30 animals. Because if I did that, I could double my income instantaneously, get myself tax benefits, right, and then just continue running my business, right? This is not an ideal situation to be in. The whole idea of just sitting around and collecting money, if you legitimately think that is, that is not the point. Because at the end of the day, if I legitimately felt like, because here's how I see it. If I had nothing, if I legitimately had nothing, I could just redo everything, all right? I talk about this. None of this costs me anything. All of this makes me a drastic amount of money. I would actually anticipate that over the next 3 months, I make somewhere around 70, 85,000. It'll be about $80,000 in the next 3 months. All right, none of this costs me anything. Even if I had nothing, I could redo everything. It doesn't matter. And after a certain point, money doesn't even do anything. It doesn't. The only thing that I found to actually do with money like this is legitimately grow my business. That's the only thing. Like, when I took a look at it and I understood what was happening, I took a look at it, I understand that I am making a massive sum of money. The only thing that I could find to reasonably do with the money that I make, because the amount of money that I make is so large, is grow my business with it. There is no way that I could spend it. If I go to the grocery store and buy whatever I want, if I sit in my living room and turn the AC on to 65 degrees for the rest of my life, and if I just sit in my living room and then I go to the grocery store, buy whatever I want, I go to the department store and I buy whatever, 10 new t-shirts, right? And I come home, I go and buy myself a new F-350. I still would have barely dented the amount of money that I make. Barely dented it. There is no way to spend it. So what did I do with my money? I grew my business with it. That's the only thing that I could find to actually do with the money. All right, and I would reasonably anticipate that I actually end up more than doubling my income by the end of the year. And even right now, with my herd being stabilized, I would consider my herd to be stabilized. In an ideal situation, I would just leave these animals alone. I would, go into another preconditioning pen, and I would just bring home another 28 animals. And just let these animals appreciate. The appreciation value of these animals will be the safety buffer for me bringing home new animals. I reasonably anticipate that these animals will appreciate for the next 3, 4, 5 months. So when they appreciate, that is the safety buffer, right? That is the safety buffer. I do not leverage against unrealized gains. All right, I don't leverage against unrealized gains. That's the safety margin for my balance sheet, and it's roughly 30%. Right, and I would be willing to do it. All right, I'm not saying go and take a loan, and I'm not saying any of that. I'm saying in my situation, I would be willing to do it. And when I did it, the way that I would do it is just take the money that I have in the bank account, invest it, and then leverage against for an equal amount. All right, but if I did that, I would have to bring home 28 animals today, and where would I put 28 animals? All right, where would I put 28 animals? But these animals, I would reasonably anticipate that these animals go up in value for about 3, 4, or 5 months, something like that. But sitting around and, sitting around being up to the eyeballs in money is not the big idea, okay? If you legitimately think, and I've always said this, a very clear indicator that you're poor is if you see cash as the greatest asset. If you see cash as the greatest asset, then you are poor. Cash is not even that good of it is a good asset, but it is not a fantastic asset. In all honesty, I would rather have $10,000 worth of the S&P 500 than $10,000 in cash. I would rather do that. Cash is not that good of cash is not a fantastic asset. If you legitimately see cash as like the greatest asset, that is a clear indicator that you are poor. I guarantee it. If I legitimately need more cash, I will just pay myself more money. All right, if I legitimately feel like I need more cash, I will pay myself more money. Having an investment portfolio, you can liquidate your assets, right? You can just exchange your assets for cash. If I legitimately felt like I needed more cash, I could just pay myself more. All right, having a good asset portfolio is far more important than some worthless cash position. Oh my God, I got $100,000 in the bank. It's not going to do anything. I could go to the bank right now and take a loan for $100,000 and they would charge me $8,000 a year for it. All right, $100,000 is not going to do anything. All right, some worthless cash position is not going to do anything. What does your assets look like? Are your assets growing? All right, what kind of assets do you have? That's more important. I would rather have $100,000 worth of the S&P 500 than $100,000 cash. Cash is the heaviest taxed asset. All right, talk about cash. Cash, and in terms of, it is, in terms of just how the world is built, effectively everybody on the planet makes somewhere between $3,000 and $8,000 a month. Effectively everybody. 98% of all of the opportunities on the planet in terms of like making cash is between $3,000 and $8,000 a month. I mean, the only way that I have seen to legitimately escape that is to do it via assets. All right, making a return on your capital. That's the only way that I've seen. I don't know any other way. If you know another way, then I would love to know, right? I would love to hear this idea of, of a different way to escape the poverty, the poorness death loop. From what I have seen, the only way to get out of it is to start making a return on your capital. And the only way to make a return on your capital is via a good asset. All right, that's the only way that I've seen. And then money after a certain point does not do anything, and in terms of my balance sheet, I would reasonably anticipate that in the next 3 months, I have zero leverage on my cattle. I make about 5 to 7 times more money than I spend on a monthly basis. And, that is not an ideal situation. All right. If I went and I bought myself an F-350, I kept my living room at 65 degrees for the rest of the summer. And I went to the grocery store and bought whatever the heck I wanted from the grocery store. And then I left and I bought 10 t-shirts and then I came back home. I wouldn't have even dented the amount of money that I make. It would not even be a dent. For me to legitimately utilize this capital that I make over the next 5 months, just to put things in perspective, for me to legitimately utilize the capital that I make in the next 5 months, I would have to buy myself a brand new F-350, maybe about $1 million or somewhere between $1 million and $2 million worth of real estate, and I would have to purchase about 250 cattle. That's the kind of money that I'm talking about. That's the kind of money that I need to effectively, that's the kind of money that I actually need to invest. The grocery store is not going to bankrupt me. Grocery prices are not going to bankrupt me. All right, living costs are not going to bankrupt me. For me to legitimately utilize the capital that I will make between now and the end of the year, and just to run my business the way that I run my business, I would have to purchase a brand new F-350. I would have to purchase about $1 million to $2 million worth of real estate, and I would have to purchase 250 cattle, 200 cattle. But here's the thing. When I buy all that stuff, it will actually end up making me more money. It will actually end up making me more money. It will make me a positive return. And I talk about this. This is the big idea. Nothing costs anything. When you actually understand this, nothing costs anything. Anything that does cost anything is such a small amount of money that it doesn't matter. All of this costs me nothing. All of this makes me money. That's the big idea of utilizing assets to make returns. Even if I went and bought myself, I would anticipate that over the next 5 months, I generate enough money to buy about, to reasonably leverage myself for about $1 million to $2 million worth of real estate, buy a brand new F-350, and buy 250 cattle. Even though I buy all of that stuff, it will all be an investment, and it will actually end up making me a positive return. Nothing will cost me anything. The only reason that I will do it is to make myself more money. In terms of a financial sense, all of that stuff will actually end up making me more money. And in terms of a spiritual sense, the reason that I'm doing that is because I really want to challenge myself. I've been sitting here collecting money for a week or two. I'm already up to the eyeballs in money. And I've been sitting here collecting money for a week or two, and I legitimately feel physically sick. Like, I feel like my health is going downhill. Because, I legitimately feel like my health is going downhill. Sitting here collecting money is making me feel sick. It's not an ideal situation to be in. It's not something, at the end of the day, if I legitimately felt like sitting here on a 10.5 acre field for the rest of my life and making $500,000 a year, making $350,000 a year, I can always come back and do that. I legitimately took a look at my balance sheet this morning. I took a look at what needs to get done. And I was in just the idea of sitting here and doing nothing for another 3 weeks. Sitting here and doing nothing for another 2 weeks, 3 weeks, when I have a stabilized herd, I have money in the bank account, I have a massive amount of positive equity. It's actually making me feel physically sick. Like, I legitimately feel like my health is going downhill because I have to sit here for 3 weeks. This is not an ideal situation. I don't want to be up to the eyeballs in money 24/7. All right, I would rather go and buy myself 28 animals. All right, but that's a very realistic way to look at it. For me to invest the amount of capital that I make, realistically, for me to invest this capital, I would have to purchase somewhere between $1 million to $2 million worth of real estate, buy myself a brand new F-350, and about 200 to 250 cattle by the end of the year. And when I do that realistically, granted that I do it correctly and I do it properly and et cetera, if anything changes, I will say it. But when I do that, it will all end up making me more money. Nothing will cost me anything. All right, and that's it for me today.